On the Giza Plateau in Egypt, carved from a single massive outcrop of limestone bedrock, there is a statue that has been staring east into the rising sun for longer than anyone can prove. It is the largest monolithic sculpture in the world. It has the body of a lion and the face of a human being. It is roughly 240 feet long and 60 feet tall. And for most of the last century, mainstream Egyptology has told us with confidence that it is roughly 4,500 years old, built during the reign of the pharaoh Khafre as part of the same construction program that produced the Great Pyramid. That is the story most people know. The Sphinx belongs to Khafre. It is Old Kingdom Egyptian. It is a bit older than 4,500 years. This is what the textbooks say. It is what the tour guides tell you. It is what the plaques at the site itself will inform you if you visit today. There is only one problem with this story. Every year, the evidence against it gets stronger. And a growing number of researchers, some of them credentialed geologists, some of them independent Egyptologists, some of them scientists from fields Egyptology has traditionally ignored, have been arguing for decades that the conventional dating of the Sphinx is not just wrong, but wrong by thousands of years. Not by a few centuries, not by a millennium, by potentially 5,000 years or more, placing the original construction of the Sphinx at the end of the last ice age, in a period when Egyptian civilization is not supposed to have existed at all. In this video, we're going to look at the mainstream case for a 4,500-year-old Sphinx, and then we're going to walk through the specific pieces of physical evidence that mainstream Egyptology has never been able to explain. We're going to look at the water erosion controversy that started this whole debate in the early 1990s and has never been resolved. We're going to look at the strange proportions of the Sphinx itself. And we're going to look at what the geology of the Giza Plateau is quietly saying about who built this thing and when. No pseudoscience, no aliens, just real evidence carved into real stone. And a question that mainstream archaeology has been trying to walk away from for 30 years. Let's get into it. The mainstream case for a 4,500-year-old Sphinx rests on three main pieces of evidence, and it is worth understanding them clearly before we look at the counter-arguments. The first piece is stylistic. The face of the Sphinx, according to Egyptological consensus, shows the characteristic features of Old Kingdom royal portraiture, the shape of the nose, the arrangement of the headdress, the proportions of the eyes. Egyptologists have compared these features to known statues of Khafre and argued that the resemblance is strong enough to establish that the Sphinx was carved during his reign. The second piece is architectural. The Sphinx sits within a large temple complex, and the causeway leading to the Great Pyramid of Khafre passes directly adjacent to it. The physical relationship between the Sphinx and Khafre's pyramid, along with the shared limestone quarrying, has been taken as evidence that they were built as part of a single coordinated program. The third piece is inscriptional. Between the paws of the Sphinx stands a stone known as the Dream Stele, erected by the pharaoh Thutmose IV around 3,400 years ago, describing how he cleared the Sphinx of sand and restored it. The stele mentions a name that some Egyptologists have read as Khafre, suggesting that even in Thutmose's time, the Sphinx was associated with the earlier pharaoh. This is the mainstream case. Now let us look at what is wrong with it. The first problem is the stylistic argument. It is not actually as strong as it appears. When forensic experts have been asked to compare the face of the Sphinx to known statues of Khafre, the results have been unequivocal. In the early 1990s, an independent forensic anthropologist named Frank Domingo, a senior detective with the New York Police Department who specialized in facial reconstruction, was asked to conduct a professional comparison. He examined detailed photographs and measurements of the Sphinx's face alongside the surviving statues of Khafre. His conclusion was that the two faces belong to entirely different individuals. The proportions do not match. The jaw structure is different. The skull morphology is different. His formal report stated that if the two faces were presented to him as evidence in a criminal investigation, he would testify that they could not be the same person. Mainstream Egyptology has, for the most part, ignored this finding, but the finding itself has never been rebutted. The face on the Sphinx is not Khafre's face. The second problem is the architectural argument. The relationship between the Sphinx and Khafre's pyramid, when examined carefully, is not actually as tight as it is often presented. The Sphinx sits inside a natural depression in the bedrock, carved out from the surrounding stone. The Sphinx temple in front of it is built from massive limestone blocks, some of them weighing more than 100 tons, that were quarried directly from the depression around the Sphinx itself. This means the temple and the Sphinx must have been carved at the same time, from the same stone. Fine. But here is the detail that mainstream Egyptology tends to skip past. The temple blocks used in construction are Old Kingdom in style, but the surfaces of those same blocks on their exposed weathered faces show erosion patterns that are massively more advanced than any comparable Old Kingdom stonework at Giza. The blocks are older on the outside than the construction should allow. The most parsimonious explanation is that the blocks are older than the construction that used them, and were quarried, weathered, and then reused during the Old Kingdom from stone that had already been standing exposed to the elements for a very long time. The third problem is the inscriptional argument. The reading of the name Khafre on the dream stele of Thutmose IV is, in the specific line that supposedly identifies the Sphinx's builder, extremely damaged. The relevant hieroglyphs are partially eroded, and the identification of any specific pharaoh's name from that section relies heavily on interpretation. Some Egyptologists read it as Khafre. Others have argued that the surviving symbols are ambiguous and could equally support other readings, or no specific reading at all. The dream stele is not the smoking gun it is often presented as. It is a partial, damaged inscription that has been interpreted defensively but not definitively in support of a specific dating. So the mainstream case is weaker than it appears. The face is not Khafre's. The blocks may be older than the construction. The stele is not conclusive. None of this, by itself, would necessarily push the dating of the Sphinx back thousands of years. What did push the dating back? What has kept this controversy alive for over 30 years now is the physical evidence carved into the bedrock of the Sphinx enclosure itself. And this evidence, more than anything else, is what mainstream Egyptology has never been able to explain. The story starts in the early 1990s with a man named John Anthony West. West was an independent Egyptologist, a writer and researcher without formal academic credentials, but with an unusually deep knowledge of Egyptian archaeology. He had noticed, while studying the Sphinx enclosure over many years, that the weathering patterns on the walls of the enclosure looked strange. They did not look like the weathering he was used to seeing on other Old Kingdom structures at Giza. They looked instead like the kind of erosion you would expect to see on stone that had been exposed to running water, sustained prolonged rainfall, or flooding over enormous periods of time. And West knew that this was significant because Giza has been a hyper-arid desert for the last several thousand years. There has not been enough rainfall in the region during the entire recorded history of Egyptian civilization to produce the kind of erosion he was seeing. West needed a geologist, and he found one. In 1990, he brought in Dr. Robert Schoch, a professor of natural sciences at Boston University with a doctorate in geology and geophysics from Yale, a fully credentialed academic scientist, not a fringe researcher. If you watched our video on the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan a few weeks ago, you will remember Schoch. He is the geologist who examined the underwater structure at Yonaguni and concluded that it was a natural formation modified by human hands. Schoch has a reputation for going wherever the evidence takes him, even when it takes him somewhere his colleagues do not want to follow. Schoch traveled to Giza to look at the Sphinx enclosure for himself. He examined the walls. He photographed the erosion patterns. He compared them to weathering he had seen on limestone formations in other parts of the world. and he came to a conclusion that has been controversial ever since. Schoch concluded that the erosion patterns on the walls of the Sphinx enclosure, deep vertical channels, rounded and undulating surfaces characteristic of prolonged water action rather than wind action, could only have been produced by sustained rainfall or flooding over a period of thousands of years. And based on the known climate history of the Giza region, this level of erosion could not have been produced within the last 5,000 years. The last time the Nile region was wet enough to produce this kind of weathering was during and immediately after the end of the last ice age, roughly 7,000 to 12,000 years ago, which meant, Schoch argued, that the Sphinx enclosure, and therefore the Sphinx itself, must have been carved before that period of wet climate ended, not 4,500 years old. At minimum 7,000 years old, possibly 10,000 years old, possibly older. The response from mainstream Egyptology was, to put it mildly, dismissive. Zahi Hawass, the most prominent Egyptian archaeologist of the last several decades, publicly attacked Schoch's work in strong personal terms. Mainstream geologists were commissioned to produce counter-arguments, most of which attempted to attribute the erosion to wind action, salt weathering, or other mechanisms consistent with the arid climate of the last few thousand years. Schoch published his findings in peer-reviewed geological journals, presented at academic conferences, and responded to each of the counter-arguments in turn. The controversy has never been formally resolved, but if you look at the geological evidence Schoch actually presents, not the personalities, not the polemics, but the actual weathering patterns on the actual bedrock, his argument has held up remarkably well against 30 years of attempts to dismiss it. And then there is the head. This is the detail that even people sympathetic to the mainstream dating cannot fully explain. The head of the Sphinx is disproportionately small relative to its body. This is obvious to anyone who has looked at photographs of the site. The proportions are not those of a natural leonine sculpture. The head is significantly smaller than the body should require. And the reason for this, according to a number of researchers, is that the current head is not the original head. The proportions suggest that the head was recarved at some later date from what was originally a much larger sculpted head into the smaller human head we see today. And the material evidence supports this. The head of the Sphinx shows dramatically less erosion than the body. The body has been weathered by whatever forces produced the enclosure erosion. The head has not. The head was carved later, possibly much later, into stone that had been standing exposed to different weather conditions than the body had. This has a straightforward implication that mainstream Egyptology has never seriously engaged with. If the head was recarved, then the original sculpture is older than the current head. The current head may indeed date to the Old Kingdom, and may indeed have been carved during the reign of Khafre, which would explain why the face somewhat resembles Old Kingdom royal portraiture without being an exact match for Khafre specifically. But the body of the Sphinx, the original monument, is older, possibly much older, possibly based on the erosion evidence dating back to a period before Egyptian civilization existed at all. Put all of this together, and a very different picture of the Sphinx emerges from the one you will find in mainstream Egyptology textbooks. The face is not Khafre's. The temple blocks show weathering older than their construction. The enclosure walls show water erosion that requires a wet climate that ended thousands of years before the Old Kingdom. The head is disproportionately small and shows less erosion than the body, consistent with having been recarved from an older, larger sculpture. Every one of these pieces of evidence, taken individually, could be argued against. Taken together, they point in a single direction. The Sphinx, in its original form, is much older than mainstream Egyptology admits. The 4,500-year-old date is defensible only if you dismiss the geological evidence, the forensic analysis, the weathering discrepancies, and the head-to-body proportions. Dismissing all of that requires a great deal of confidence in a story that, when examined closely, has surprisingly little direct evidence supporting it. The honest question is not whether the Sphinx is older than we were told. The honest question is, how much older? Schoch's most conservative estimate places the original construction at 7,000 years ago, at the tail end of the North African wet period. Other researchers have pushed the dating further back, 9,000 years, 10,000 years, possibly even earlier. At the outer end of these estimates, the Sphinx becomes contemporary with Göbekli Tepe. It becomes a piece of Ice Age monumental architecture, built by people who, according to the standard model of human prehistory, were not supposed to have been capable of it. We do not know who built the Sphinx. We do not know when. What we know, with growing confidence, is that we do not know what we thought we knew. The mainstream story of a 4,500-year-old monument commissioned by Khafre is not the settled fact it is often presented as. It is a hypothesis, defensible in parts, but weakening under the accumulated weight of physical evidence that points elsewhere. The Sphinx sits on the Giza Plateau, facing east into the rising sun, as it has faced for however long it has actually been there. It has watched the rise and fall of every Egyptian dynasty. It has watched the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. It has watched every civilization that has ever laid eyes on it come and go. And it may have been watching for very much longer than mainstream archaeology has been willing to admit. The stone is still there, the erosion is still there, the evidence is still there. It is waiting for someone to look at it honestly and follow the evidence wherever it leads. Tell us in the comments, do you think Schoch is right about the water erosion, or do you lean with the mainstream? We read the comments and reply to our favorite theories. If you enjoyed this one, hit subscribe. Next week we are going to look at 3 ancient maps that show parts of the world their makers should not have been able to see. Maps of Antarctica without ice, coastlines that no longer exist, continents charted with a precision that will not be equaled for another 1,000 years. It is one of the strangest chapters in the entire history of cartography, and we are going to walk through the evidence piece by piece. Until next time, stay curious.